Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, First Edition, and specifically we're going to talk about Gary Gygax. And here is what I'm going to say about Gary Gygax. There is a lot of bad revisionism that is happening right now about what happened to Gary Gygax and why he left TSR in 1986, and how it wasn't his fault and he was a victim. And I'm here to say, in my humble opinion, that is 100% wrong. One of the things we're very blessed, and I'm going to tell you why this is just shockingly wrong. And in my humble opinion, Gary Gygax leaving TSR is 100% Gary Gygax's responsibility. He was not a victim. He constructed his own demise and then worked on it. Like, put in labor to make sure that his own demise at TSR was assured, right? And if he had just, and here's the other thing is, if he had become self-aware and if he could have shown any humility, he could have salvaged the situation, and he didn't. I think it's 100% fault, Gary Gygax's fault that Gary Gygax left TSR, right? Here's the other crazy thing is, I'm not sure it's a problem that he left TSR. Honestly, I'm not sure at all. I don't think for 1 second the game would be better today if Gary Gygax had stayed in 1986 if he had not become self-aware and become humble, which he never did. So if he never changed those two attributes and he stayed, we would not have a better game. All right, so let me explain this. All right, so you can go on Twitter. You head over to Aaron Pedantic's comment center and you'll be like, oh, they ran him out on a rail. It was so terrible. So here's what happened. 1974, Gary Gygax launches Dungeons & Dragons. 1986, in the fall of 1986, Gary Gygax quits TSR. That's important. He was not fired. He quit. Okay? That is very, very, very important to remember, that he absolutely quit. Okay? All right. So here's what happens. So at this point, basically, the people will say, oh, the problem was the Bloom Brothers and Lorraine Williams ran him out. Now, the Bloom Brothers were the money behind Dungeons & Dragons, okay? They put up the cash, right, to get Dungeons & Dragons printed, and they put infusions of the cash into the company over the next 12 years, okay? Now, and they also way overspent on, and this is all my understanding. Please correct me if any of this is wrong factually, right? But to me, as I understand it, these are the facts, right? So Bloom Brothers put in the money. This is important. Who picked the Bloom Brothers to put the money up, right? It was Gary Gygax, right? He could have funded it himself. He could have put it all on his own dollar, right? But he didn't, right? Or he could have been waited and done a very small print run and then grown it and scaled it much more organically and much more slowly, right? But he brought the Blooms Brothers in, right? So people are like, oh, the Blooms Brothers did Gary Gygax wrong. He chose them, right? And he chose them to be the influx of money into the company. This wasn't something that was pushed on him, right? The other thing is Lorraine Williams, who took over as CEO of, by the way, so what happens is Gary Gygax comes in 1974. He starts working on the game. And by 1981, right, only 7 years after the game is, he's called to Hollywood to create the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. And he goes, and he leaves Dungeons & Dragons, only 7 years old, to the Blooms Brothers and pretty much not many other people, or no one who could keep things in line, right? So he came back in 1983, and the company's all, actually around 84, 85, it starts to go clear that the Bloom Brothers have overspent so much, right, that the company's almost out of business, even though sales are strong, okay? Now, all this happened while Gary was doing the following. This was his fault. Gary demanded the 3 C's. He demanded command. He was still in charge of business dealings. He never let go of business dealings. I think he was literally the CEO, and he was constantly saying, I want to be in on the business side of Dungeons & Dragons. Great, no problem, Gary, all right? But he also said, I want to be a creative. If you look at the Orange Spine Easleys, the 1980 12 core hardbacks, Gary Gygax wrote 6. He wrote the DMG, he wrote the PHB, he wrote the MM, he wrote Unearthed Arcana, he wrote Oriental Adventures, and he wrote Greyhawk, or no, not Greyhawk. He wrote one other book that is slipping my mind right now. He wrote 6 books in the 80s, so he wanted command, he wanted creative, right? And so he wanted command and he wanted commercial. He wanted oversight over money items too. But then his hand was in every pie, right? His finger was in every pie. He never stepped back and let the bean counters do what he wanted. He was in their business until he wasn't, because he had overburdened himself with command, creative, and commercial, right? He wanted control of the CEO position. He wanted a voice in the money, and he wanted a voice in the creative, right? And the creative went even beyond writing the Dungeons & Dragons book. He was literally off in Hollywood writing a show, right? And it was outrageous hubris on his part. It was 100% his fault. The problem that we ran into was, this was a major, major problem, in that he really just did a terrible job from every single perspective, and really never did the hard work that he should have done and got in the right space, right? He just demanded too much control, and he didn't give other jobs to other people and delegate and say, this is too much for me and for anyone. I need to split these jobs up, and if I want to write these books and I want to make Dungeons & Dragons great, I need to step back from command, I need to step back from commercial, and he never did it. He wanted his pie he wanted control over every aspect of the game, and what ended up happening was that he was a master. He wanted to be master of many, and he was a master of none, right? Now, not only did he overgrasp when it came to control of what to do with the game itself, he tried to control too much, rather than splitting the jobs up and letting people who knew what they were doing in these other areas do it, rather than saying, I can do all of it, which he clearly couldn't, right? Then the situation comes to, the banks come in, right, and they see what's happening, and they're like, okay, we recognize what's going on here. This is a poorly run company, and we want oversight, right? So the bank said, hey, we need some more leadership at the top, right? Gary Gygax chose Lorraine Williams. Now, Lorraine Williams would be the CEO of the company, saving Dungeons & Dragons, as Gary Gygax, who really was doing a very, very poor job of maintaining control, right? She comes in and steps in. Gary chose her. Gary chose Lorraine Williams, okay? She was his choice. So this idea that, woe is me, I got pushed out of Dungeons & Dragons is not the case at all. What happens was Lorraine Williams comes in as CEO. Lorraine Williams was the person who Gary Gygax chose. Now, what ends up happening is the company's in so much trouble, right? By 1985, by 1986, Lorraine comes in and she's like, I gotta get control of this, right? The spending's out of control, and I gotta put this company right? Because nobody but Gary Gygax had cocked this thing sideways 6 ways to Sunday and done a very, very poor job of running the show. Okay, so that's the problem. Is Gary had screwed things up at TSR. Now here's the juncture where all of this is his fault. Lorraine Williams is now in control, and she's like, you know what, Gary, you threw this whole thing. You ran off to Hollywood. And wrote cartoons while everything burned here on the real game, right? And the reality is, I don't like it. I don't like what you did, and you need to step back and you need to get in a corner. And you got a desk. Lorraine Williams never fired him, and she's like, shut up, sit in that desk. Maybe you write a few monsters. Maybe you write a module, whatever, right? But the reality is, Gary had lost control of the game. Gary had done a poor job of maintaining success for the company, right? Now you got Lorraine Williams comes in, who's capable of running the company, and she's like, you sit in the corner, right, while I get this all cleaned up. This is the problem, right? Gary was not willing to sit in the corner. He felt humiliated, and he felt like he was under her thumb. He was. right? And he should have been humiliated because he made outrageously pure, arrogant, very unself-aware choices, right? He tried to control command, he tried to control commercial, he tried to control creative, and he was not capable. He was capable of the creative part, and I even think he would have been capable of the commercial or the command part, but not any two of the three, right? And the idea that he was capable of all three is patently false, which we can see, right? So the reality is, anybody who could be accused of running him out, he literally chose them. These are the people he chose, right? So what he could have done is sat in a corner, kept his mouth shut, right? And been humiliated for a year or 2 years, right? Now, I'm very blessed. I have a wonderful job, but I have been here, right? When you do hard things, sometimes you get kicked in the teeth, right? And you got to lay low until the dust clears, and you got to take your lumps, right? But Gary didn't want to take his lumps. He thought he was going to just go off, and everybody was going to just read all of his ideas, and that Dungeons and Dragons would be left behind, right? I think he had an idea that he could recreate the whole thing, right? But the reality is he couldn't, and nobody wanted to hear any of his stuff, right? After he got out. Dangerous Journeys, yeah, whatever the heck that is, right? And the reality is what he had created there was really precious. He was unself-aware. He was arrogant. And if he had just taken a year, 2 years, even 3 years of humiliation, I think he could have reconciled things with the Bloom brothers, reconciled things with Lorraine Williams, been subjugated to Lorraine Williams where he should have been, right? He needed to be her subordinate. And I think a lot of people are getting it twisted, and they're like, oh, Gary Gygax, somebody else's subordinate? Yes, he should have been an employee. He shouldn't have been the lead, right? Don't put creatives in command. It's a bad idea. It never ends well, right? And so that's the issue is Gary Gygax was not run out of TSR, okay? And the reality is if he had taken his lumps, taken a 1, 2, 3 years of deserved humiliation and subjugation and being an employee, a dedicated, quiet servant to Lorraine Williams the way he should have been, he could have reestablished himself and then been a powerful creative through the entire 50 until 2008 when he passed, and frankly he might be alive today, right? So that's my opinion. What do you think? Do you understand once the facts are laid out that Gary Gygax leaving TSR was nobody's fault but Gary Gygax? That's a hard fact in my humble opinion. That is correct, right? But I'd love to hear your take. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.